Hi, welcome back to Being on the Facade. I'm Doña Junta from Swamp Me Chronicles, and we got Sabrina. You want to
Hi, I'm Sabrina.
from where?
Well, we usually do that at the end. From observing spooks and other vices.
Yes. So today we have a really cool special episode. We finally get to interview Max Ismail, I guess. That's how you say it. You could go ahead and, as far as say however you can on Instagram. And just I'll go ahead and he's on his Instagram. He describes his Instagram as Chicago, but born Angelino, preservation, history, and architecture. So we'll go ahead and let him introduce himself. So if you can introduce yourself and share maybe a brief history of yourself and where you're born and raised.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm glad we finally made this happen.
Yes.
So yeah, my real name is Max Chavez. Instagram name is Max Esmael, which is my middle name. I am born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley, actually. So I was born in Duarte, but then I moved to Covina when I was a kid, and I grew up there. And then after graduating from high school, I kind of went around a bit. I was in New York for college, and then I moved back to LA. And then, geez, I'm trying to think of where I ended up. I mean, right now I'm living in Chicago. I'm currently working for a preservation advocacy organization here in Chicago called Preservation Chicago, and I'm their director of research and special projects. So I have been doing that for coming up on a year now. I think I've been with that title. So
okay, nice.
yeah, I'm a historic preservationist essentially.
Yes.
That sounds exciting.
Well, we're gonna take you way back a little bit right now because we love your history and history in general. So if you want to go on with the next question, Sabrina.
Sure. Did your interest in histories and history and buildings start when you were a kid, or when you were younger, or more of an adult?
Yeah, it's something that I think about often because I always wonder, people always ask, "Oh, how did you get interested in it? Where did you pick that up from?" And for a while, I was like, I don't know. I'm not really quite sure, but I think after I started to think about it for a while, my parents, when I was young, I think they both love history and buildings in their own way. And so when I was a kid, we would do a lot of road trips. And we would normally do them. I had a lot of family in New Mexico. So we would do a lot of road trips through the Southwest, and then, up the West Coast a lot of times. And so a lot of those stops would always be like old towns, ruins, sort of some of like the more indigenous sites. And so I think, that coupled with all the museums that we would stop at when I was a kid, sort of really, I just really got into it. And I think, for a while, I actually, when I did undergrad, I majored in film studies, which I love. I also love movies. But even when I was like doing film studies, I remember like always reading up on buildings and architecture. It was still like an interest for me. I still loved all of that stuff. So, I did it for a few years, and I eventually just kind of came to the realization that I didn't like working in the film industry. Sort of, bopping around for a bit after that, and I was just like, I just really want to get into buildings and working with buildings. So, I found a historic preservation program that I applied to for grad school.
Yes.
And that's where I ended up. And from there, it's really grown into, I always knew that I would like it, but I really love it. It's just something that it gives you so much purpose and meaning. And it's really nice to work with these things that really matter. So I think that's sort of where it started. Growing up in Southern California too is just, there's good buildings everywhere. So
Right.
True.
you can't like ignore it. It becomes kind of just a background for you that's always there. And I think we grow up, and a lot of times the buildings around where we live may not be in the best shape anymore. They're not taken care of, but I think there comes a point that everybody can sort of point to where you look at a building, you're like, wait a minute, that's something, that means something, or that's cool. And I don't know why or why it's cool, but it's got to be cool for some reason. And that's, I think, what's important about historic preservation. You keep those
Right.
things around.
But you're actually one of from the other guests we had, they kind of developed it at an early age, and some of it because of their parents. So that's really cool that your parents inspired
Interesting.
you and in some way, that
Yeah.
to be able to
Yeah.
love that.
That is actually really interesting. I guess it really does sort of come from what you're brought up around, right? And you get
Right.
taken these places and
Exposure.
yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
So you mentioned some of that. I was going to ask you next. What's kind of like your academic journey? I mean, you mentioned undergrad was film. What
Mhm.
did you want to do in the film industry initially, and then what? As far as you did mention you didn't like it anymore, but can you tell us a little bit about that journey, the academic journey you went through?
You know what? I didn't know what I was going to do, honestly. I was like 18, 19, and I was like, I don't know. I'm too young to be making this decision about what I want to major in. But I knew at the time that I really liked movies. So I thought, oh, maybe I can get into, I don't know, marketing or advertising or doing something, even though that wasn't really where my heart was at. So, uh, I did the film studies. I, watched a lot of movies, wrote about a lot of movies, understood like the industry. And then once I graduated, I actually worked in public relations doing
Okay.
PR for some film studios, and it was awful. It just was
Oh,
the culture was so wild and just not for me. And obviously other people have different experiences because it's people love to do that work. But yeah, wasn't my thing. So I did that for a bit, and then I ended up doing grad school. It was a preservation program in London, but it was through NYU. So it
okay.
was sort of they have a campus in London, and that's where I did all of my preservation training up until COVID interrupted that, and I had to come back home and finish the last few months of my program from Covina.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That kind of threw a lot of people off. So, I
Yeah, it was
mean,
wild.
and it's still happening. So who
Mm-hmm.
knows?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, that's cool. So as far as so yeah, tell us what a preservationist is, because a lot of people don't know what that is. I mean, I have an idea just from some of the people that are preservationists LA, but what is it for people that don't know? Like, what is it?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because I have people ask me that all the time. And when I tell people that I'm a preservationist or a historic preservationist, people think of preserving as something being like very small.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you're preserving artwork or you're restoring artwork or you're doing something with curating archaeological pieces. So that's no one ever gets it quite right. And it's funny because it's everywhere, right? The things that we save and the things that we choose to honor with plaques and to keep them around and make sure that people uh, get to experience them in the future. It's everywhere. It's all around us, and yet a lot of people don't know that it's a field. So preservation can take a few different forms. I think it depends on where in the preservation world you want to go. So I work for an advocacy organization, and essentially that means that we fight for buildings. If something we find out
Mhm.
is going to be demolished, we sort of rally our efforts together around a building to save it. And that can take a lot of different forms. It can take either talking to the city to try and make it a landmark, talking to the owner, asking them, hey, don't demolish this. Can we come up with some sort of compromise where we can find a way that it can be reused or we can restore it? Or, if a developer is trying to demolish it, we talk to them and say, hey, is it possible that this can be integrated into whatever you're trying to put up on this piece of land? And there's a lot of compromise when it comes to being a preservationist. There certainly is a stereotype, and it's one that I think is fair and can be earned sometimes, is that people who are big preservationists, they want to keep their neighborhoods frozen in amber. They don't want them touched. They don't want them to change. And that also means like they don't want apartment buildings going up. So they don't want new people moving into their neighborhoods. I mean, there's all these stereotypes about
Mhm.
preservation being used as a way to stifle development. And that does exist out there. But I think that's not not my brand of preservation. I
Right.
think it's a little bit different. But there's other forms that preservation can take. If you're working for maybe a state office, you can be reviewing National Register forms that people get. They'll submit paperwork to get something on the National Register, or historic tax credits. There's all different ways that it can be taken. But it's for being such a small field, it is kind of a really dense field of work.
Would you say it's a small field?
Yeah, it's a small field. There's not a lot of preservationists out there. I don't. It's funny. Everybody in the preservation world, I feel like everybody knows each other, because there's not a ton.
Or do people call themselves that, and maybe they're not like officially like studied it or something? Or how would that work?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, people can get into the world of preservation without having a degree in preservation. There's a few different ways to get in. You can do preservation. There's urban planning. Some people who have studied architecture have decided that they'd rather just get into preservation as opposed to working in architecture. I know some people will consider themselves preservationists if they advocate for preservation options a lot of times.
Yeah.
So there's a few different ways that it can be. I think the term can be tossed around, but yeah, I think it's important that people who really feel strongly about the buildings in our cities and the built environment and the way that our cities look and the stories that those buildings tell, I think it's important that anybody consider themselves a preservationist, because it's something that we need to be thinking about more and more every day. It's just so important for our cities, and we need to expand. I think the definition of what a preservationist looks like and who can do it, because it can be anybody, I think.
Yeah, no, that's true about how we all should kind of see ourselves as that with some of these historical places, and maybe not like officially how you are working in it that way, but maybe other ways, right? Like, be signing those petitions, or attending the city council meetings and whatnot, or anything in that arena, or even just visiting, taking photos, documenting it, all that is helpful in some way.
Exactly. Yeah, I always recommend that people, get involved with your local preservation organization, because, they will put the blasts out there and they'll say, hey, this is a big effort. We need people to show up. We need people to sign a petition. We need people to write to your city council member and tell them, this is not cool. We want this around. This matters to the community, and this matters to me. And it can go as far as, even in my advocacy work at my company, we are putting calls out there for changes to policies. Preservation, the way it exists in certain cities is an effect of the laws and the policies that are written, right? So, for example, in Chicago, if something is deemed historically significant, and there's a couple problems with the way that things are deemed historically significant in Chicago. But if it is deemed historically significant, then if somebody wants to demolish something, they get, there's a 90-day sort of holding period before it can be demolished. So there's a review process.
Right.
There's a discussion period. But, 90 days is frankly too short, I think. It should be much longer. And I think that if you're going to demolish something historic, especially if it's housing, there should be some sort of financial penalty. If you want to demolish it, you should pay money that goes into a fund that helps bring housing back to somewhere else in the city. So there's all these sorts of policies that we can be advocating for that change the face of preservation. And one of the best ways to do that is at a community level. If people are saying, hey, change the demolition policies in our city. We're sick of seeing everything just get knocked down left and right. I mean, places in LA are obviously ground zero for, you take these small, historic, really cute sort of Spanish colonial little houses on decent sized lots, and they tear them down, and then they put up these big, boxy, ugly gray things, which is like, I mean, fine, if it's a question of taste, but it's just like, you could have used that house. Why did you have to tear it down? I don't know. If you want something like that ugly, just go to the suburbs. Build out there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, so why Chicago? Because you were in LA, and why Chicago?
Yeah. Gosh, that is kind of a funny story. I had a internship with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And it was supposed to be in Washington, D.C., and then COVID happened. So they said, well, actually, we still want everybody to get the experience that we were going to offer with this internship. So if you can find an organization in another city, or maybe a state organization, we'll still support you and fund that opportunity instead. So I put the call out to a couple different preservation organizations and reached out to places where I would be like, okay, I'd be okay with living here. And Preservation Chicago was like, immediately they wrote back to me. So we had a few talks about that. And then I just said, you know what, it's like 6 months into the pandemic. I was like, I'm not doing anything else. So, let's just try. I'll move out to Chicago for a bit. And when I came out here, I was like, maybe I'll be here for 6 months and just get the experience and then come back to LA. But then they offered to hire me, and I've been here ever since. So it's definitely an experience. And I miss LA for sure. It's always, whenever I go back, I try to visit as many places and sites and buildings and take as many pictures as I can. Because, when I'm back here in Chicago, it's like fun to edit them and research them. And it gives me a nice little connection back home.
Right. No, for sure.
Yeah.
So the next part, we're going to kind of like dig into your Instagram history, because one of the goals too is kind of highlighting people that are into the same type of, domain, that with the history, architecture, on social media. So, and you were one of them, just like the few others that we've been, reaching out to. But so we did stalk your Instagram. And
it was lovely. I really liked
Thank you.
Some of the photos are really, really interesting.
Yeah. And so, okay, so I seen you started your Instagram in 2015. I'm not sure if you did it before or what, but did you start off kind of like a personal Instagram and it kind of developed into what it is now? Because a lot of people do that.
Yes.
Tell us about the start, because just real quick, the first ones were like only like 2-word captions and like kind of more photography based. So tell us about that, the beginnings.
Yeah, damn, you went back. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, I've had an Instagram since I think Instagram first came out, which I don't even remember exactly what year. I've had it for a while, and it's always been, I mean, I had it in college, I had it in undergrad, so at least like 2011, 2012, I think, around then. And it's always been the same account. And it was always like a mix of just like, it was for me, for me and my friends. I would post like pictures of friends, or I'd post pictures of places that I went to, maybe get a little experimental with the picture or the framing. And then I think as I started to realize that I like buildings a lot, I was taking more and more architectural photos, maybe with a little bit of history sprinkled in here and there, but it was never like a thing. It was just sort of what I was just doing for fun. And then when I was in London, so that was 2019 to 2020, when I was in London, I was doing a historic preservation program. So it was like my life was just buildings and sites and historic places. So I was constantly taking photos. And I think that's when I started to realize like, oh, I really like doing this. This is like fun to share these cool places and these stories with people. So eventually, it must have been, I guess, August or September of 2020, when I was just, bored as hell in the pandemic. And I was like, what am I going to do? What should I do? So I still had the account, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do.
Were you public or private initially?
I was public.
Oh, okay.
I was public. Yeah. Always been public. And I ended up thinking like, you know what? I want to do like a week-long sort of series on Paul Revere Williams, the architect. And I was just like, he was just really interesting to me, one of the most prominent Black architects in American history, a Los Angeles legend, so many buildings that he designed around LA. And I was like, I just want to do like a week-long sort of focus on him and do a couple stories and a couple posts. So I went out to a few of his sites and took pictures. And people were really receptive to it. They were like, this is really cool. Like, I had no idea about him and all of these buildings. And these are all places that I've seen before, but didn't really register as being, significant or important. And it kind of went from there. For a while, I was doing like every week I was doing like a different focus, whether it was an architect or a certain city in LA County. or an architectural style. And then once I like got an internship and a job, it was a lot harder to maintain that, but I still try to mix it up a bit. But yeah, so that's kind of how it's been ever since, I guess, summer of 2020.
Yeah, and I think there was a post that you wrote. You're like, I don't know how to write captions or something. It was a joke, I think. But now you have really long research. I'm like, you knew how to write captions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always been, I've always loved writing. That's like one thing that I love to do, but I was very humble about it for a while because I was like, I don't know, I don't really feel like I know what I'm doing, but I know that I like to do it.
Yeah.
And now it's great. I mean, my job is literally researching. I research all day and just write. So sometimes the captions that you'll see are, they'll be born out of something that I actually ended up working on for work. So I went somewhere for a job. I took a picture and I'm like, I've already done the research for work. I'm like, let me just throw it on Instagram too.
Absolutely.
You know, it's already sort of done. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's funny that you say that because I think one of the goals with my account was that with architecture or with history, you know, I think people write about it like academics and they write these big books and it's like so hard to understand for everyday people, right? You know, you read like certain history books or architecture books and you're like, I don't know what does this mean? It's like, it's all like giant words and it's hard to access for people. And I think if we're going to get people on board with really loving their cities and the buildings that are in their cities and the culture that's there, you have to make it easy to read. You have to make it accessible.
Yes.
Right. And that's sort of what I aim to do with my Instagram. I try to tell these stories about, you know, that random corner shop around the around the corner that you didn't really pay attention to, or this house that you probably passed by, but you're like, oh, you know, shit, something really important happened here.
Right.
And saying it in a way where it's easy to digest and it's interesting as opposed to like, you know, boring and completely hard to understand, because, you know, that doesn't push the conversation forward, I think.
Right. Makes sense. And you had some questions about traveling. When we were talking, Sabrina was wanting to ask about some traveling.
Well, I seen Stonehenge, and now we were discussing that you were in London, and I think Stonehenge is so appropriate to discuss because that's like, you know, some of the first buildings, right? How was it to see Stonehenge, and do you have a favorite place that you like to go for buildings? Is like there a certain place that like you love or you've fallen in love with? That's your favorite?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, to answer the Stonehenge part of it, it's so funny that you ask, because I always think about this when I talk about the UK. I went to Stonehenge, and it's one of those places where I think, you know, you go and you say, I've seen the pictures. It's a bunch of rocks in the ground. How cool can it possibly be? And I kind of went in with that mindset, you know, it'll be cool. It'll be cool that I get to go to Stonehenge, but I don't know if it's going to change my life. And I get there and I don't know what it is. I don't want to get like all woo woo about it, but
let's get woo woo. Let's get woo woo.
Yeah.
Yes.
It felt very, there was just some like a weird energy. I don't know what it is. And that's not something that I think I've ever really tapped into. I feel like I'm pretty, I don't know, not like that. And it was just it was something. It was, I couldn't stop looking at it. I don't know if it's maybe the mystery around it, the location that it's in. I mean, it's just in a field out in the middle of like the English countryside. But you know, I kept circling it, I kept pacing it, and I was like, this thing is incredible. And I was like, I didn't want to leave. It was such a magnetic draw. So I mean, if anybody ever gets the chance, it's an incredible visit. It's a couple hours outside of London.
It's bucket list for me,
amazing.
you know, on the bucket list, definitely.
You gotta go. It is so cool. And the museum there is really like, it's really nice. And I think it does a good job at again, telling that story and making it easy and understandable without getting too in the weeds about a really dense history. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's very cool. And they're immense too. I think people don't realize, like, they're big rocks. They're really, really big when you get up next to them.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's huge.
I mean, and they're some of the very first structures, or the you know, some of the most ancient structures that are still standing. So it really ties it all into preservation and everything. It's like you're seeing a whole moment of your complete life, like in one spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about how it for so long it just sat out there and probably nobody was tending to it. It's kind of a miracle that it's still around. Um, for so long it just sort of just sat there in the rain and the mud and the dirt and probably I can always think about like, can you imagine being the first person to like come back across Stonehenge and be like, what the hell? Like, what is
Yeah.
this? Like we should probably do something about this.
Probably the Druids will it
Yeah.
so.
So before we get to your architecture part, I do want to have you more
Mhm.
questions about the Instagram, because what I really like is that I guess the past year or so you're really engaging on your stories. I mean, you have like these pop quizzes, you have like on your page you have these carousels. I mean, it's just tell us about the stories, because you're deep inside the story world with your different. I love that. So tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
doing them on stories.
Yeah, I think the story thing is fun because it's a little bit more organic and improvisational. Whereas if I do a post, I take pictures on an icon. So I go out and I take the photos, and I have to come home and upload them. Then I got to edit them. Then I got to research them and write them and craft the whole thing, which is fun, but it is time consuming. Whereas the stories, if I see something cool and I'm like, oh, people would like to see this, I just like throw it up there. So I'll just like throw it up, write something really interesting. And I think the quizzes and all that go back to again, engaging people.
Right.
And especially if I'll do like a little lesson on something and then I put a quiz up like a week later, uh, saying like, what is the style of this building? Or when do you think this was built? Or can you guess who the architect is?
Mm-hmm.
People get really excited when they get the answer right. And I think that's like, it's a nice, like positive reinforcement. It's like, I'll get messages from people being like, I got it, I finally did it. And I'm like, cool, like that's amazing, because you're reading it, you're learning it, you're absorbing it. And that's like a new sort of corner of knowledge that you get.
Yes. No, I
Yeah.
love
So it's
that.
a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And I try to make
Yeah.
the one answer like way different than the rest. Because if I get them like, if I do like name the style, and I do like 3 styles that all sort of existed around the same time and all kind of look similar, like it's hard, unless you're working in this or have studied it for a while. So I try to make it like way different answers, so you can try to use a little of I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of just like a way to eliminate the most ridiculous answers.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
also noticed on some of the, before you got into more detailed posts, a lot of angles and symmetry, curves
Mm.
and lines. Like I noticed you like a lot of that. And tell us about that, the kind of the sharp, I think it's like the modernism that pops up in those.
Yeah. I think that's sort of a way of um me trying to convey what's important about the architecture of a building, because I think that maybe you'll see like a mid-century modern building that's like on the street, maybe in LA somewhere, and it's sort of beat up. Maybe it hasn't been loved in a long time. It's
I
been
love
sort of
those too,
neglected.
as you
Me
know.
too, me too. They're incredible. And so I think I tried to show them a lot of times, like either geometrically, so you can sort of see like what the emphasis is of the building. Is the building cool because it has a big curve, or is the building cool because it's got very clean symmetry to it? And I think by, I don't know, like sort of centering that, you can show people like, yeah, when you see this building from the street and you pass it by, you don't really think about it, but here it is. This is what's really cool about it. And then I think that helps convey like, oh yeah, okay, I see it now. I understand where you're coming from. It's very interesting. It's not just some random building that I happen to just be passing by. There's something there. And part of that is also just the Instagram algorithm. People like pretty things. You want to get
True.
things on there that people like are like, oh cool, double tap, very nice. So it's a mix of both, I think.
It definitely adds to your perspective. When I take photos, I'm not a photographer by any means, but those little tiny special details are what really makes the building for me personally. So when I saw like a lot of your photos, I see that as well. So I thought that was really special.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
It's almost like pretty much, well, the photography element to it, like the art, the photography, and not just architecture, but I see all of that, you know? So
Yeah, thank you.
no, it's great.
Yeah, I think it's you can make a very average building look really good with like the right photo. And I guess that's what I'm trying to tell, people who follow me. It's like, hey, this building that you don't give much thought to, look at it. It's actually pretty neat, it's cool. I always think about, I mean, not to compare myself, but there's an architectural photographer, probably maybe the most renowned architectural photographer named Julius Schulman, um, who photographed, his whole thing was modernism. He really just did a lot of photography for all the great modernist architects, mostly in Southern California. So every great modernist building that you can find in LA, Julius Schulman probably took a photo of it.
Mhm.
And the other day I was looking through, they have his a lot of his collection on the like the Getty archives online. They're all digitized and you can go through. And I was like, you know what? I wonder if he did anything or like around the SGV, like maybe he took, maybe there was some cool building around there. Um, and he had a ton. I mean, he had stuff in Covina, West Covina, Walnut, Diamond Bar, all these things. And I'm like, that's crazy that Julius Schulman was out here like photographing like the West Covina Plaza. Like,
Right.
who's taking photos of that? But the way that he shoots them, they look amazing. You're like, wow, actually, yeah, you're right. That is a cool building. So I think there's a lot of power in photography of getting you to see something very differently that you didn't think was all that impressive in the first place. Um, so I would always recommend looking at his photos because you'll look at it and you're like, oh, I've seen that building in real life and I didn't really think anything of it, but man, it looks really cool here.
Right.
He's got some great stuff.
How do you go about doing your research? How long does it typically take for you to do like a post that has like a lot of research? I mean, what's kind of like the way that you approach that with the research?
Yeah, I think it depends on which one. If I'm doing a post about a building in LA, building records in LA are a lot easier to get through than in Chicago. Chicago is very tough because it's
Oh,
it's a lot older. A lot of the records really start in the around 1870s or so. So it's a lot of like scans of like old ledgers, and they're just all washed out. And the pages are, it's really tough. Whereas like LA records online are pretty easy. I mean, a lot of them are just kind of scanned images, and like sometimes the handwriting's hard to read and all that, but
right.
it's a lot simpler. So if I'm doing a post on LA, those take honestly not as long sometimes because it's just easier to find the records. The Chicago ones can take a little bit more digging. Uh, and sometimes posts will take forever, or maybe I'll just abandon a post because I can't find anything on it.
Yeah.
I'm just like, come on, like there's got to be something on this building, even if it's a year or an architect or something. So sometimes it can take an hour to research a post. Sometimes it can take like 5-10 minutes. It's always nice when I photograph something that I already know about because I just can write the caption from my own brain. But yeah, I use newspapers.com a lot,
Hmm.
which is just like a godsend because you can just search a term and it pulls up stuff. So newspapers.com is an amazing. I'm like trying to like plug newspapers.com, but it's an
No, Hood
incredible.
Historian did the same thing.
Really? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because he does stuff with newspapers.com all
Yeah.
the time.
And so
And
maybe we
it's
got to get a
amazing.
subscription to that.
Maybe we should.
Oh, you have to. You have to. I think also they're connected with ancestry.com. So I think you can get a membership to both as like a package deal. So
Yeah, I have
worth a
heard somebody
shot.
told me that. So yeah, you're right.
We both have
Yeah.
ancestry. Shouldn't
Yeah.
be hard.
Oh, there you go. I think you can like upgrade your account to add newspapers.com to it, and it's not very much more.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So yeah, worth a shot because you will go down rabbit holes on there. You're like, let me just search something, and you'll get people who live there, the person who built it, crimes that happened there, or deaths, obituaries. I mean, it's all on there. So I find like sometimes when I'm writing a caption, it'll end up taking a lot longer than I really need because I just start going down all these different things and opening up Wikipedia pages, and an hour later you're like, shit, like I'm not. I should be done with this already, but I got too caught up.
No, I heard about that from him. He was like, I run into other things that I'm not even trying to look for, and goes on and on. So yeah.
Yeah.
But so you're saying it takes about an hour for a long post, or a few minutes, depending on how fast you find the information.
Yeah, yeah. Some buildings are just, it's just so hard. And sometimes there's a building with too much history. Um,
Oh yeah.
and and you're like, okay, how do I whittle this down to just like a couple paragraphs? Because you want to include it all, right?
Right.
And you can't.
We
So
gotta do
that takes a while
parts.
too. Because I'm like, yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's actually smart. I should probably think about that too. Um,
Yeah.
because it's hard. You're like, you want to tell the whole story, but people are on Instagram and they're swiping through and it's going fast. So you don't want to like totally bore them and make them fall asleep. It's a really delicate balance.
But I mean, you have some stories that you did. It's not just even looking up the building. Like I really like the LA fast food series you had. So you must have dug a
Yeah.
lot deeper than that. I mean, I don't think that took an hour. I don't know, because you had like a lot of
That one took
information.
forever. that one took a while. And that
So
one was
tell
really
the
that was
audience
so
like the
fun.
history. What did you do with the LA fast food series?
Yeah, so I spent a week. This was back when I was doing like week-long series. Um, and so sometimes we do an architect or a building style or something. I remember I did like I did like streamline modern
Yes.
for like one week, and that was a lot of fun. And then I was like, you know what? One of the things that I love about LA and like nobody else has is that we have like a big history of like fast food, like restaurants that have started here um, in Southern California. And then, it's sort of an outcome of us having like such a car centric culture. People, back in the day in the 1940s and 50s, especially, as cars became more integrated into everyday life, it was like, wow, I got to pull up to a restaurant real quick, get some food, and then get going. So we have all these buildings or all these restaurants that grew out of that in Southern California. And I can't think of really any other place where we've had so many big chains come out of that. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a week about like the history of fast food in LA. So I did a few posts. Now I'm trying to think of like what they were. I mean, there was the McDonald's,
Wiener
like
Schnitzel,
the
because
Wiener Schnitzel. I did a Wiener Schnitzel one.
did you do In and Out?
I did do In and Out. Yeah, I took a photo of the original one in Baldwin Park, or the
Yeah, there you
replica of
go.
the original one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I'm trying to think of what else I did. I know on my story I did a little bit about Del Taco, um, because that's in the area too, and they had and Taco Bell. I talked about Taco Bell. I mean, all these
Yeah.
places that are like legendary fast food places, and they all grew out of here. And then I did like the hat too, just because people love the hat. I love the hat, so I was like, I'm definitely going to do a post on that. And it was fun. I think it was another one of those situations where people were really surprised by the density of history. People eat at McDonald's and Taco Bell and Del Taco and Jack in the Box and all these places, and you're like, oh, this is just a restaurant, but no one really stops to think about like, well, how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
And they're crazy histories. I mean, some of them involve people like, I mean, McDonald's obviously is infamous for all the history that happened with, um, it was founded by two brothers out in San Bernardino, and then they got taken over by Ray Kroc, and all of these things. I mean, it kind of makes you think a little bit more about the Big Mac you're about to bite into. You're like, man, there's like been some really crazy like TV drama attached to these
Mm-hmm.
places.
No, that's awesome. And just from those stories, I like the programmatic ones that you did, the
Oh
Googie.
yeah.
So those are really fun. So now we could dive in more into like the architecture part. So I think earlier you asked Sabrina, what's your favorite building? I guess what's your favorite type of architecture or building?
Yeah, that's actually a
But
really
let me
good
ask
question.
you
I think
this.
about
It doesn't have to be one. It could be top three architecture styles if you want,
okay,
if you can't decide on
I can
one.
I,
Or
I can
top
do
three
that a little bit
buildings.
easier, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, top three buildings is way too hard. There's no way. I could definitely we'd be here all night. I think we could definitely do styles. I think maybe top three styles. More and more, I think what's for me, I love postmodernism because it's I didn't used to get it. I always thought it looked kind of like, it looked really tacky and dated, like 80s, 90s. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't really understand it. And then there's some really good postmodernism in London. So I saw a couple things and I was like, oh, okay, it clicks now. I understand where it's coming from. A lot of it grew out of a reaction to modernism in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where, it's all very clean and it's a lot of just glass walls and they said, well, we're going to do the complete opposite of that. We're going to sort of make fun of classical architecture. We're going to do oversized columns and just really ridiculous and over the top stuff. And I think it's really fun seeing people contend with it now because they really don't get it. There's always that talk about how styles come back after like 50 years and people are like, oh, okay, I get it now. Now it's 50 years. It's sort of historic. I understand it. So that's like the one thing with postmodernism that I always try to say, like, it's important. You may not see it right now, but in another 10 years, you're going to be like, oh, I get it now. I always tell people that I think the really crazy 80s postmodern KFC on Western.
I screenshotted that one because I was like, I like that how you highlighted that one because back in the day I was like, oh, just another KFC, but when you brought it to light in the way of postmodernism, it's like, oh, okay, I see.
I mean, it's people, again, you drive by it, you think, well, that's sort of a weird KFC, and then you don't pay it any mind.
That's from the 90s, right? Is it from the 90s?
Yeah, I think like I'm bad with the years. I always forget them after I write them. You'd have to look it up again and see. But that one it's designed to look like a big deconstructed bucket of chicken. I mean, 1990. It's hilarious.
I just looked it up. 1990.
Okay, that's what I thought. It's really fun. It's really funny. So that's one that I'm like, it should be like an official city landmark because it's really cool. And I think in 30, 40 years, when we're talking about what postmodernism was and what it did to our cities, it's like, look at this. This is really neat. And I mean, I could talk about postmodernism forever, but on top of that, I also love like streamline modern.
So second, streamline modern?
Yeah, I would say maybe second.
Okay.
Yeah. I love the cleanliness of it. I love the way that it's very much, it didn't pop up everywhere. There were sort of different cities did different takes on it. I hear in Chicago, you don't see it too often. It sort of manifests itself as something we call like art moderne here. It's different. But streamline modern captures like just this moment, like right after Art Deco, where they're like, okay, we're going to do Art Deco, but it's going to be really clean. It's going to be really streamlined. And especially in LA, it's like, and we're going to make it look like a big boat. Like it all looks like boats. And it's so weird. And it's like, what a strange thing to focus on, but it became like its own style.
Yes.
I mean, like where in the world, like the Coca-Cola building, on, oh God, I forget what street it's
Central.
on. It's on Central. That's right.
Yeah.
That big Coca-Cola building. It's like, where else in the world are you going to see something this ridiculous? I mean, it's just a big Coca-Cola boat. It's so wild. And the way that it comes together in like apartment buildings around LA, when you like stumble upon it, you're like,
oh my
God,
that's
so cool.
Yes.
Like the little duplexes in the courtyards. I mean, they are amazing.
Yes.
And no matter what you do to them, you put stucco on them, you beat up those windows, they've still got such a cool shape that you just can't get around it. They just look awesome, even in their worst conditions. So that's another one of my favorites.
Okay.
Gosh, on top of that.
One last one. Let's see.
Oh no, that's tough. I do love like mid-century modern stuff.
Okay.
That's always just like been a favorite of mine. I think
like the cheesy houses or like the signs, like what do you like about it?
I think a little bit of all of it. I think, well, mid-century modern is tough because it's a big umbrella and a lot of people went a different ways with it. I mean, if specifically, like I love Googie, you know, because that Googie offshoot of mid-century modernism is so fun, right? It's like the space age and it's fast cars and it's really cool angles and boomerangs and neon. I mean, it's just like a really fun sort of chapter in American, especially LA history. But then the other ways that mid-century modern kind of got carried out, like the really heavy, intense modernism of like, the case study houses where it's like, all glass and very simple roof lines. I mean, it's really clean. I love the way that it was this vision for how people could live. When it was coming around in the 50s and 60s, it was like, how do we create homes for the next generation of Americans? What are the homes that people are going to live in? What are they going to look like? So I think it's really interesting that it started off as this sort of high concept thing, and then after 10 years you see offices and dentist buildings, and they're scattered all throughout. And it was a style that could be adapted into really anything. If you had a building that needed a purpose, you could make it mid-century modern because it sort of worked with any style that you were going to go for. So yeah, I everything that comes out of like that 1950s 60s modernism I think is really interesting. And also just like a slight shout out also to like the ranch house, because I love ranch homes, and I think that they also are, a lot of them look real kind of yeehaw country sometimes, but the way that they're planned out and the way that they're laid out is really because of modernism.
That's
so
true.
it's funny that modernism kind of got adapted to make these houses with like, you know, shingles on the sides and like fake bird houses, or like the storybook, the Snow White ranch houses and all those. It's such a weird, such a weird amorphous thing that could become anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are probably like my top, I would say.
Yeah, and just to the postmodernism, I mean, I kind of felt the same way initially, like, oh, I don't know if I like 70s, 80s, 90s, like it's too, I don't know. But there is some things about it now, like the 70s, obviously it's almost like 50 years or whatever. It's
Yeah.
showing something now. So
Mhm.
you're right. And I ran into one of your photos that I really like for really modern, San Bernardino City Hall. Oh my God. I was like, I can't believe I would like that, because it's just black and yellow and like
Yeah.
glass, but it looks really cool. Like it stands out. It's like a transformer or something.
Yeah, it's wild. I think it benefits from the fact that it's actually pretty narrow and just
Uh-huh.
long. I think if it was like a big imposing like front facade, it'd be like, ugh, that's kind of nasty. But there's something about really there's something really delicate about it. It's like a really narrow, slender, long building, and the way that it kind of it doesn't like hit the ground totally in the front. It kind of,
Yeah.
arcs over a little bit. It's, if you have a chance to go into like the San Bernardino like Civic Center area, it's like brutalism, old like Spanishy Beaux-Arts stuff, that thing. Like it's a really crazy mix of things. And then that one is really cool just because of the architect, Norma Sklaric. Um, you know, it's a great story, all connected with that building.
Right. And another one we do love here on Beyond the Facade is the HP building. Sorry. You took a picture of
Oh
it.
my God, yes. That one's incredible.
I like how you got kind of, it looks very, the way the colors are in your photo, like very blush tones, very but then it has, I don't know, the way you captured it was a great shot. So I really
Thank
love
you.
that building too. And then that apartment building you discovered in HP, that was really cool. I was like, I need to go see that like one day. I keep forgetting, but
that one's nuts. And there's nothing else on the street like it. It's just that one building. Yeah. Yeah, that one's really cool.
And we'll be posting the pictures on the YouTube. Like we'll bring those up so we could show people what we're talking about. But yeah, that one was cool. And then, I mean, those people in the apartment building probably don't even really think about their building as architecturally significant, and
yeah,
they're just living in a really cool, streamlined, modern building, and they have no idea. Maybe they do, but they probably are just living their lives, right?
Yeah, and I think that's all part and parcel of preservation, trying to spread the story of why these places are cool and why they're really interesting. Because I think once you can get communities aware of what's in their own backyard or even what they live in, you really can further instill pride into people and be like, you live in something really cool. Fight for it. Fight for your communities. Take care of your cities and push back against the powers that be that are trying to change that. These things are really significant, and bringing awareness to it is all part of it. And again, making it easy to understand and accessible, not just, telling somebody, oh, you live in a streamlined modern building. Like, don't you know what that means? I'm like, well, no, tell them, explain it. Right. Like, I don't give a shit. I'm trying to like work and feed my family. Like I have other concerns, but it matters. And there's a way to spread those stories.
Yeah. And I mean, I have a lot of favorites that I screenshot. We all like the one we just got the other day too. The one, the pink
that
building.
Was so cool, right?
Yeah,
I was so happy when you posted it.
I didn't know that you had posted it. I'm like, but she spotted it, and I'm like, okay, let's go. And I'm like, oh shoot.
I spotted the little rooftop from afar from the street above because we were looking at that one building I forgot on the corner, and I thought, what?
The other hotel on the Ashbury.
The Ashbury, yeah.
Oh,
and I was like, what are those? What are those roofs? We gotta go see what belongs there. And it did not disappoint.
It's so cool, right? And the way that the street sort of angled, it's like it feels like it should be like in San Francisco or something. It's like going to topple over.
Yes.
It's so cool. That one, actually, a friend showed me that one. I didn't know that one was there either. Somebody lived around the corner and was like, I'm going to take you to go see this real quick. And I was like, what is this? This is so wild.
I want to go in it. Like, they have apartments for rent. I think I want to go like, hey, I'm interested in renting an apartment.
Yeah.
Because it's so high. So it's probably good photos from like that top level.
Yeah.
And it looks like it has little special nooks too.
Yeah.
Like little special nooks with the towers. Yeah. So
there's like a little corner tower with like a little tiny window in it, right?
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see how that all works out in there.
It's so cool.
And just the other photos, like a lot of apartments with names on them. You guys know I love those. And if it has a name on it, I've seen a few that you have. And I've seen that you emphasize on some that are just like the colors, like green, like you're kind of focused on the colors. This one goes back.
Oh man, I'm doing. Yeah, that's a deep cut.
Yeah, and then like the breeze blocks and stuff like that. Do you have any photos, Sabrina, that you were interested in from his feed?
They're all really lovely, but one that caught my eye, which is unexpected, was I think it was the San Francisco airport. I think it was
Oh yeah.
It was just dark and gray, and it was long, and it just looked really interesting the way you captured it.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's one that I remember. I flown from LA to San Francisco that day, and I remember sort of turning around and getting that view of it, and I'm like, "Whoa, my God, that's kind of cool." Especially, I mean, airport design is interesting because we just passed through it, and we're like, "Oh my God, just get me in and out of here!" Like, I don't want to hang out here any longer than I need to.
Right.
But there's some really good airport design in the world. I mean, in an LAX, like I always want to hang out and like shoot the theme building. I mean, it's just such a cool, big spaceship looking thing in the middle of LAX. But whenever I'm there, it's either to get somewhere or to go home. So you never get a chance to hang out.
Max, have you ever been to Denver, to the airport in Denver?
Ooh, years ago when I was a kid, and I remember it being weird.
It is so friggin' weird. It is so weird.
And there's like a whole story, right? People
and
have
a
like
city, like a subterranean city and stuff.
Yeah,
it's so weird.
People say it's got like there's like a legend around it. It's cursed. It's a weird place.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's a creepy little spot, but it's interesting. It looks like tents. It looks like weird tents on the outside.
Yeah. I remember that strange one.
So this other monstrosity you took a photo of, it's a monstrosity because come on, look at this big wall for these apartments.
Oh yeah, where is that?
What's behind there?
I know it's got like that big mid-century.
It's called Glendon Charles. How weird is that, right?
I feel like that one was in Alhambra, maybe, or Monterey Park, or somewhere around there. It's like in the western part of the SGV, I think. I'll have to go back and look at that one. I love those old mid-century buildings. They're just so cool.
Right. So we got about 30 minutes left, or we're gonna do the last parts of it. And Sabrina would like to do this because it's her specialty. She just has some questions on this. And
back to the woo-woo, as we said previously. And I'm just gonna read you verbatim what I had written down. It's a couple of questions. What are your beliefs in the paranormal? Have you ever experienced paranormal activity? And if so, what?
And is there any building that you can name that really seemed off, or you may have had something paranormal happen to you in?
Yeah, well, I'm Mexican, so I definitely believe in all that stuff. I believe in it, and I try not to mess with it because no thanks. I'm not trying to get possessed anytime
Me too.
soon. But
I'm on your side.
You too. I don't know
No.
what I'll do with you two.
Somebody tries to bust out a Ouija board. I'm like, nah, I already know it exists. I'm not trying to get it involved in my life in any way. Yeah, no, I definitely believe. It's funny, as a kid, I was very much into ghost stories and the paranormal. It was like a big fascination of mine. It was something that I always was like, if we went on a trip somewhere, I'm like, let's find the haunted spots. Like, let's check it out. So I was definitely very much into that. I remember even as like a kid, we went to San Diego, and two of the stops that we made were the Whaley House,
Of course.
which is like a classic, and then the Hotel del Coronado.
Of course.
So classic, like, haunted spots, which are also just really cool old buildings. So it was like you kind of got a little bit, you got a taste of both. Yeah, I think it kind of connects to that whole thing that I love about old buildings, is like the lives that are lived in them, the stories that happen there. And I like to consider that, if there's a spirit or a ghost or something, that it's connected to some sort of history with that building. And that's all part and parcel of it. It's all really important that we are sharing those stories. So yes, absolutely believe in that, for sure. I'm trying to think of a place that I've been to. I mean, obviously, like, the older, more decrepit buildings are the ones that feel the spookiest. You just like walk in, I'm like, I don't know,
Sure.
something feels off about this one. There is a building here in Chicago that I will not say the name of, but I went into it and I was not supposed to be inside of it. But it is historic. It's a very historic building. And it used to be, I hope I'm not giving anything too much away, but it used to be a store. And it just sort of feels like when you walk in, like, it's historic, it was designed by a very well-known, accomplished architect. And there was just something about it that just felt really eerie, super spooky. And I think because there was still so much left of the original building, you still had like tin roofs or tin ceilings in there, little remnants of probably what was there, old wallpaper. So, I mean, it feels like this thing that's sort of just stuck in time. And there's something really, I don't know, kind of eerie and weird about that. Yeah, I'm sure there's other places that I've been to where I'm like, I don't know, this feels pretty haunted to me, but maybe that's just my own projection.
Anything in Los Angeles?
Anything in LA? That is a good question. I feel like at least like on Carroll Street in Echo Park, there's got to be something haunted around there. There's too many Victorian houses for it at least like not one of those has got to be haunted. There's some definitely some old energy in those buildings. Even if they were moved from their original spots, I feel like the ghosts must have come with.
Right.
Yeah, I have to think about that one. I am not quite sure off the top of my head, but I'm sure. Well, definitely. What is the hospital, the Boyle Heights one?
My best friend.
Yeah,
Mother.
why can't I think of the name of it?
Mother.
Linda Vista?
LACUSC or Linda Vista's the other
Linda
one.
Vista Hospital, yeah.
Linda Vista is the one I'm thinking of. Oh, well, that one too. Oh, that's actually, yes. Yes, that one. I went there as a kid. The big Art Deco
Yes.
one. I went there as a kid and I remember immediately being like, nah. There's some, like, the lights were flickering on and off.
Of course.
No, it was, yeah, that one for sure. Now that you mentioned it, that one for sure is haunted. No way it's not. Great building though. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah, we say our best friend
for sure.
because anytime we're in LA, it literally pops up in our eyesight because you know how it's like on a hill and it's just there. So, and then we will go to the area on the weekend and kind of chill because it's kind of quiet. It's not the school and everything. Everybody's like on. So we just love the area. So we always go say hi. Like literally, like,
Yeah.
hi.
She demands attention. Literally, we'll be somewhere random and we could see her in the skyline.
We
like
personify
further.
buildings.
Yeah, we do. We
Yeah,
do.
you should. You have to. Oh, but she's huge too.
She
Not in a bad
is.
way. She's just a big bulky thing that you see from like all directions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think my sister was born there too, actually, now that I think about it. I'm pretty sure. I'll have to ask. I'll ask my
Yeah.
mom. But yeah, for sure.
So thank you for that. And so just before we wrap it up, any future goals or plans like with your career as a preservationist? Where do you see yourself going with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be here in Chicago for a bit. I I love LA, and I would love to come back at some point, just because that connection to your hometown. I always have this dream about in the city of Covina. So outside of Los Angeles, there's what 81 different cities in LA County, something like that, um, and a lot of them don't have like local preservation ordinances or like frameworks to help save their buildings. And so if something is saved, it's like purely by luck. It's just like if somebody happens to want to save the building and not demolish it. And so I always have this like dream of going back to Covina, because Covina, from what I understand, I'd have to check again and see if anything's changed, but I believe that they actually have a charter sort of to create like a local preservation ordinance to help save the buildings, but nobody's ever gone ahead and done it. Nobody's created a framework for what that would look like. And I would just like love to go back and be like, Covina's got so much old stuff. It's the city that nobody ever really, I think nobody thinks of that often.
Right.
And you go there and it's like there, I mean, along I think like along Covina Boulevard, it must be near downtown Covina. No, maybe it's around Badillo. I forget exactly where. You can tell I've been away for a while, but I mean, there's like mid-century doctors' offices galore. You have like
Wow.
big craftsman houses that are still there. I mean, Covina is old. So I mean, the downtown's still got a lot of really old buildings that have been, unfortunately like covered up with really bad alterations. But there's a
Right.
lot of stuff there, and it's important. And I would love to be able to go back and just say, hey, I'll do it for free. Like, let me just come up with like a framework of rules that you can put into place to help protect these things. And hopefully that can spread to other cities too. All these cities that only a handful of places have like historic organizations or preservation ordinances. I mean, LA, Pasadena, I think Whittier, a handful of others. I think maybe Burbank. So I mean, not a lot for as much history as we have.
Very true.
But yeah, so I think I'll be in Chicago for a bit. I'll still be learning here and working on a few projects. I think the big project that I've got going on right now that I'll plug, even though we're not even that far along on it yet, is I'm working on a big, basically a big mapping project here in Chicago, mapping out sites of like gay, queer, trans heritage all over the city of Chicago. So different places that matter to the community that have been kind of gone ignored for a long time, or aren't generally known to the public.
Right.
So that's sort of a big project that we're taking on, because it's a way to bring these stories that have been, hidden for so long. And these buildings get demolished because nobody knows about them. It's one thing when a building gets demolished and everybody knows, like, well, that's historic and we know what happened there, but we're going to demolish it anyway. But when the story's not even out there, you don't even give the building a fighting chance. So it's a way of getting that out there and making sure that the queer community has a place in the story of Chicago and of the United States, as we keep expanding the story of what America looks like. It's those kinds of stories that we have to bring to the forefront. For so long, preservation sort of just told one story about, old white men and the presidents and the architects who are really famous, the really famous architects, and everything else kind of gets pushed to the side. But now we're seeing it starts to diversify and it starts to get more complex, and we're really telling the full story of everything. So I think that's sort of where I want to dedicate myself to, is expanding that idea of the stories that we tell and the people that we represent.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier, like what's your goal for your page, your Instagram, but I think you mentioned earlier that you just want to be able to educate people and help them learn history, would you say? Or Anything else with as far as a goal for your page?
I think I want to make it less scary. Maybe is the thing that I want to share. People message me and they say like, I'm really sorry, like maybe this is a dumb question. I'm like, no, like you don't know it. There's no dumb question.
Right.
It's not something scary. It's something really cool. It's really interesting. I really encourage people to ask me questions all the time because I mean, there's stuff people ask me. I'm like, I don't know. Let me look it up for you. I'll find out. Yeah, I want to make it just less intimidating and less scary and more easy to access for people because it's with buildings, with the built environment, with our cities. I mean, it's all around us all the time, and we just it becomes background noise. We take it for granted from time to time, and we don't. How many times have you seen something driving around LA and you're like, I drive this road all the time and I've never noticed that before. Like that's been here the whole time. This is really cool. And and we're folks that are attuned to this. We're looking for stuff like that.
Yes.
For people who aren't even kind of plugged into that thing, they're not looking for it. So I'm trying to show people that it's everywhere and it's incredible. I mean, it surrounds us at all times. So we should care about it and we should think about how we can keep it around.
No, that sounds perfect. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, but even like there'll be times I haven't gone to somewhere like for 10 years or something. And going back now, I see it different, or it feels like I've been there it's the first time because now I'm looking at it from a different perspective. So it's very weird how that happens.
Absolutely. Even when I go back to Covina after being like away for 6 months or a year, I'm like, that is actually pretty cool. Like that's neat. I've driven by it so many times and didn't even register. And now it's like, oh yeah, I can see how that's something. There's a there essentially. It's great, So that's what I hope I have. One of my closest friends always tells me, I look at buildings so differently now just because of what you post from time to time. And I'm like, that's awesome. I love to hear it,
Yeah.
Really great.
So where could people find you as far as your either social media or anything like that, or any shout outs you have to anybody?
Yeah, I mean, social media mostly is my Instagram. I do have a Twitter account, which I can send to you. You can plug it because it's too hard to spell out. I'd rather just we can link to it somewhere or something. But those are really it. I would say also on top of that, if you're interested in preservation or architecture or history outside of Los Angeles, feel free to follow my company, Preservation Chicago. We post about different projects that we're working on there. And also, I mean, if you're somebody who is just learning about historic preservation for the first time and it seems interesting, look for the preservation organizations in your city. I mean, the LA Conservancy is like an incredible resource. They're doing it just like unlike anybody. They're amazing. But San Francisco, New York, obviously Chicago, Seattle. I mean, cities all over the country, all over the world are doing incredible preservation work. So, look into it. There's amazing ways to sort of see how everybody's doing it everywhere.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I really appreciate that. And it was great to be able to hear from an actual preservationist.
Yes, and you're doing some great work, and those goals, there's some really important ones, and I appreciate you taking all that on. That's a lot right there.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so if you guys want to follow us on Instagram, swapme_chronicles, I'm Doña Junta, or you could also follow the podcast page on Beyond the Facade podcast on Instagram. Also YouTube, we usually try to upload that a little bit like a week or so later, so we could get some of the photos up that we showed. So Sabrina, if you want to plug in your info.
Hi, observing spooks and other vices. Observing_spooks_ and other vices, guys.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.